I never believed that one summer could completely change the course of my life, but it did. It started on an unusually warm afternoon in June. I had just finished a long, exhausting week at work and decided to take a walk near the lake outside town. The air smelled of pine trees and fresh grass, and for a moment, I could almost forget about deadlines, bills, and all the noise of daily life. And then I saw her. She was sitting on the old wooden pier, feet in the water, wearing a light sundress that swayed gently in the breeze. Her hair caught the sunlight like fire, and when she looked up at me, her green eyes seemed almost amused, as if she had been expecting me. "Hey," she said, smiling casually, like we were old friends. I hesitated for a second, surprised by how natural it felt to approach her. "Hey," I replied, sitting down a few feet away. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all." She dipped her toes in the water again and looked back at the horizon. There was something magnetic about her calmness. We started talking about the weather, about the lake, about nothing important, but every time she laughed, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. Her name was Claire. She had just moved to town for the summer, to get away from the city, as she put it. We sat there until the sky turned orange. When I finally stood up, she did too. "You should come back tomorrow," she said softly, as if giving me a secret invitation. I didn't even think twice. "I will." The next day, I found myself walking faster than usual to the lake. And there she was again, this time lying on her back, reading a book. She smiled when she saw me, and I couldn't help but smile back. "You're early," she teased. I didn't want to miss my chance, I admitted. That day we talked about music, favorite movies, and even shared a few embarrassing stories from high school. There was a lightness between us, as if we had known each other for years, not just 2 days. When she stretched her arms and the sundress lit just enough to reveal her shoulder, I caught myself staring. She noticed, of course, and for a moment, she didn't pull the fabric back. Instead, she gave me that little mischievous smile again. By the end of the week, meeting Claire at the lake had become my new routine. Some days we swam together, other days we just talked until sunset. I could feel the tension building between us, subtle, electric. One evening, after we had been splashing water at each other and laughing like kids, I helped her out of the lake. She stood close to me, dripping wet, her sundress clinging to her body. "Thanks," she whispered. I wanted to kiss her right there. But I didn't. Instead, I just looked at her and she looked right back, as if daring me to take the next step. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her, about the way her hair stuck to her neck, the way she had leaned a little closer when she laughed. It was driving me crazy in the best possible way. By the time Saturday came, I had made up my mind. Tonight, I was going to tell her how I felt. When I got to the pier, she wasn't there. For a moment, my heart sank until I saw her walking down the path, barefoot, carrying 2 bottles of cold beer. "You made it," she said, handing me one. We sat down, and for a while, neither of us said much. The silence was strangely comfortable. Finally, I turned to her. "Claire," I said, my voice lower than usual, "I like you." She tilted her head, pretending to be surprised, though I could see the corners of her mouth twitching. "I was wondering when you'd say it," she whispered. And then she kissed me. Her lips were soft, tasting faintly of beer and summer air. The kiss started slow but quickly deepened, and I felt her fingers curl into my shirt. When we finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard. This summer might turn out to be very interesting, she said, her eyes shining. I couldn't agree more. After that first kiss, nothing was the same. The next morning, I woke up with a stupid grin on my face, replaying every second of what had happened. The taste of her lips was still fresh in my memory. I knew that if I saw her again, I wouldn't be able to pretend that nothing had changed. When I arrived at the lake that afternoon, Claire was already there, sitting cross-legged on the pier. She looked up, and for the first time, she blushed a little, something I hadn't seen her do before. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, sitting down next to her. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence between us was charged, almost electric. I could feel the warmth of her body next to mine, smell her perfume, something light and floral. Finally, she broke the silence. "So," she said, tilting her head playfully. "About last night?" I couldn't help but smile. "Yeah." She grinned, biting her lower lip. "I liked it." Before I could reply, she leaned in and kissed me again. This time there was no hesitation, no careful testing. She kissed me like she meant it. Her hand slid up my arm, stopping on my shoulder, and I felt her body press against mine. When we pulled apart, she laughed softly. "You taste like sunscreen." "You taste like trouble," I said, making her laugh harder. That day, we didn't just talk, we explored. She convinced me to swim with her to the far side of the lake, where no one ever went. The water was cool and refreshing, and by the time we reached the shore, we were both out of breath and laughing. "See? Worth it," she said, dropping onto the grass. I sat next to her, still trying to catch my breath. Her dress was wet, clinging to her skin, and I tried not to stare, but she noticed anyway. "You keep doing that," she teased, looking down at herself. "Doing what?" I said, pretending not to know. "Looking at me like that." I didn't answer. Instead, I let my gaze linger, deliberately this time. Claire's expression softened. "You can touch me, you know," she said quietly. My heart skipped a beat. I reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. She closed her eyes briefly at the touch, then leaned closer. Soon we were kissing again, but this time it was slower, deeper. Her hand found the back of my neck, pulling me toward her, and I could feel her body trembling slightly under my touch. When we finally stopped, we were both lying on the grass, breathing hard. "Wow," I whispered. She laughed softly. "Yeah. Wow." Over the next few weeks, we became inseparable. I'd finish work and rush straight to the lake. We'd spend hours together, sometimes just talking, sometimes lying next to each other in comfortable silence. The kisses became more frequent, more passionate. There were moments when we were so close to crossing that invisible line, the one between sweet summer romance and something much more intense, but each time, Claire would pull back at the last second, giving me that teasing smile. "Not yet," she'd whisper. "Let's make it last." It was torture. Delicious torture. One Friday evening, she surprised me by saying, "Come to my place tomorrow." I froze. Until now, our entire world had been the lake, a secret little bubble that felt separate from reality. The idea of stepping into her space felt different. "Your place?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded. "I want to cook for you." I couldn't say no to that. When I arrived the next day, Claire was barefoot, wearing denim shorts and an oversized shirt that fell off one shoulder. Her hair was tied up messily, and she looked effortlessly perfect. "Wow," I said, unable to hide my grin. She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Come in." Her apartment was small but cozy, candles on the table, a few plants in the corners, soft music playing in the background. It felt warm, inviting, intimate. We cooked together, laughing when I almost burned the garlic. At one point, she leaned over me to grab a spice jar, and I felt her hair brush against my cheek. "You're distracting," I said. "That's the point," she replied with a wicked grin. After dinner, we sat on the couch with a bottle of wine between us. "Okay," Claire said suddenly. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous game." "Exactly," she said, tucking one leg under herself. We went back and forth, sharing secrets, silly ones at first, then deeper, more personal things. Each confession brought us closer. At one point, I noticed the way she was looking at me, her lips slightly parted, her eyes dark. "You know," she said softly, "you could kiss me right now." So I did. The kiss quickly turned hungry, and soon I was pulling her closer, my hand running through her hair. She straddled my lap, and I could feel her heartbeat racing against my chest. Just when things were getting almost too intense, she broke the kiss, her forehead resting against mine. "Still not yet," she whispered, smiling breathlessly. "But soon." I groaned, making her laugh. Later that night, when I finally left her apartment, my head was spinning. Everything about Claire felt like fire, warm, exciting, and a little bit dangerous. But for the first time, I started wondering, what would happen when summer ended? The next few days felt like a dream. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from Claire, my chest tightened with anticipation. Sometimes it was just a picture of the lake, sometimes just a simple "thinking about you," but it always made me smile like an idiot. One evening, as the sun was setting, she sent me a text. "Come over. Don't be late." No emojis this time. Just a command. When I arrived, Claire was already waiting by the door. She didn't say a word, just took my hand and pulled me inside. Her apartment was dimly lit, candles glowing in every corner. Soft music played in the background, low and slow. "Wow," I said quietly. "You've been busy." She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "I told you it would be soon," she whispered. And then she kissed me, not gently this time, but like she'd been waiting all day. The next hour was a blur of heat and laughter. Her shirt ended up on the floor, then mine. Every touch felt electric, every kiss deeper than the last. When we finally ended up in her bedroom, I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't want her, but because everything suddenly felt real. "You okay?" she asked softly, her fingers brushing against my jaw. I nodded. "More than okay." And then there were no more words. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, breathing hard. Claire was the first to speak. "Well," she said with a satisfied grin, "that took you long enough." I laughed, pulling her closer. "Worth the wait?" "Oh, definitely," she replied, kissing me again. For the rest of the night, we stayed in bed, talking about everything and nothing: plans, dreams, favorite foods. At some point, I realized the sky outside was getting lighter. "I should probably go," I said reluctantly. Claire shook her head. "Stay. Just this once." So I did. The following weeks were perfect. We spent every spare moment together: mornings at her place, afternoons at the lake, nights walking through town or lying on her balcony watching the stars. But then, little by little, the cracks started to show. It happened one Saturday when I mentioned, casually, that I might have to work late a few nights next week. Claire's smile faded. "So you won't come to the lake?" "I'll try," I said, "but I can't promise every day." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't happy about it. Over the next few days, her messages became shorter, her replies slower. When we finally met again, she seemed distracted, her laughter a little forced. "Everything okay?" I asked as we sat by the water. She hesitated, then shrugged. I hate that we don't have much time left." "What do you mean?" "Summer's almost over," she said quietly. "And then what?" I didn't have an answer. That night, we argued for the first time. It wasn't a big fight, more of a clash between how much we wanted each other and how scared we both were of losing what we had. "You act like we have forever," she said, pacing the room. "But we don't." "Then let's just enjoy it while it lasts," I said. "Why ruin it by worrying about the end?" She stopped and looked at me, her green eyes sharp. "Because I don't want this to just end." The room went silent. Eventually, she sat next to me on the couch, her hand finding mine. "I like you too much," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "Then let's figure it out together." Her expression softened, and she kissed me again, slow this time, almost as if she was trying to memorize the shape of my lips. That night, we didn't just make love, we held each other like it was the last time. And maybe that's why, in the morning, I woke up with a sudden thought, I couldn't let this end with Summer. The next day, I started thinking seriously about what it would take to keep seeing Claire after she left. The idea of going back to my life without her felt unbearable. But before I could bring it up, she surprised me by saying, "I have to tell you something." My heart sank. "What is it?" She bit her lip, hesitating. I wasn't completely honest about why I came here. I waited, my stomach tightening. "I didn't just want to get away from the city," she said. "I needed to." "What do you mean?" "There's someone back there. Someone I broke up with." "But it's complicated." I stared at her. "Are you saying there's still someone in your life?" "No," she said quickly. "Not like that. It's over." I just didn't want to start this with lies. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to be angry, but another part was just relieved she had told me. That night, I sat alone on the pier long after she went home. The water reflected the stars above, calm and quiet, the opposite of what I felt inside. I had to make a choice. Either step back now, before I got in too deep, or fight for this, no matter how complicated it got. I already knew which one I'd choose. I didn't sleep much that night. Claire's confession kept replaying in my head, not because I didn't trust her, but because it reminded me how fragile everything was. This wasn't just a summer romance anymore. I wanted her, needed her, in a way that scared me. The next morning, I sent her a message. "Meet me at the lake. Sunset." She replied with a simple, "I'll be there." When I saw her that evening, I could tell she'd been worried too. She stood on the pier with her arms crossed, staring at the water. "Hey," I said softly. She turned, her expression guarded. "Hey." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was heavy, full of everything we hadn't said. "I don't care about the past," I said finally. "Whoever he was, Whatever happened, that's not what matters. What matters is this. I gestured between us. Claire's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. I was scared, she admitted. Scared that if you knew everything, you'd leave. Not a chance, I said, taking her hand. But I need you to promise me something, no more secrets. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. No more secrets. And then she kissed me, long and deep, like she was sealing the promise. For a while, things felt even better than before. We were closer, more open. The nights we spent together were full of whispered words and lazy mornings tangled in sheets. But just as I was starting to believe we were unbreakable, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw him. I had left work early to surprise Claire. As I walked up to her apartment, I noticed a black car parked outside. A tall man leaned against it, arms crossed, looking like he belonged in a magazine ad. I almost turned around, but then I heard Claire's voice from the open window. I told you it's over, she said, her tone sharp. You don't get to decide that, the man replied. His voice was smooth but cold. My stomach twisted. I didn't stay to hear more. Instead, I walked away, my mind racing. Was this the someone from her past? Was he here to win her back? By the time Claire called me later that evening, I had convinced myself of the worst. Hey, she said carefully. Can you come over? I almost said no, but then I heard something in her voice. Fear. When I arrived, she looked shaken. He's gone, she said before I could even ask. I told him not to come back. Who is he? I demanded. My ex, she said quietly. He doesn't take rejection well. I clenched my fists. Did he threaten you? She hesitated. Not exactly. But he has a way of making me feel trapped. That night, we stayed at her apartment with the doors locked. Claire curled up against me on the couch, her head resting on my chest. I don't want him to ruin this, she whispered. He won't, I promised. Not if I have anything to say about it. For the next few days, I kept my phone close, half expecting a call from her saying he'd shown up again. But he didn't. Instead, Claire became even more affectionate, almost clingy. She'd hold my hand everywhere we went, kiss me in public, as if staking a claim. At first, I loved it, the intensity, the sense that we were on the same side against the world. But then came the question I hadn't prepared for. What happens when summer ends? She asked one night as we lay in bed. I don't know, I admitted. But I want to find out. With you. Her smile was small, sad. I'm scared that when I go back, everything will fall apart. Then maybe I should come with you, I said, surprising even myself. Claire froze, staring at me. Are you serious? Yes, I said firmly. Why not? I can find work there. We can make this real. She was quiet for a long moment, then kissed me softly. You don't know how much I want that. The next weekend, we made plans, real plans about what life might look like together after summer. But just when I started to believe everything was falling into place, fate decided to throw one more curveball. It was late evening when Claire called me, her voice shaking. He's here, she said. Outside my building. I was there in 10 minutes. The black car was parked across the street. The man leaned against it just like before, arms crossed. Leave, I said, walking straight up to him. He looked me over, amused. You must be the new guy. She said. It's over, I told him. He smirked. She said that before. I stepped closer. You should go. Now. For a tense moment, I thought he might hit me, but then he shrugged, got in his car, and drove off. When I turned back, Claire was standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did, I replied, pulling her into my arms. Because I'm not losing you. That night was the most intense we'd ever shared. There were no words, no hesitation, just raw need and the feeling that we had fought for something worth keeping. When we finally fell asleep, I held her tighter than ever, knowing that whatever came next, we'd face it together. But deep down, I knew one thing, the real test hadn't even started yet. The morning after that night felt different. For the first time since I met Claire, I didn't feel like our world was fragile. I felt strong, like we had survived something that could have broken us. Claire made coffee while I sat on the balcony, watching the quiet street below. When she came out, 2 mugs in hand, she looked softer, somehow relieved. He hasn't been back, she said, handing me a mug. And he won't, I replied. She sat on my lap, curling into me like she belonged there. I don't want this to end, she said quietly. Then it won't, I told her. For the next few weeks, we lived like there was no tomorrow. We went on late-night drives with the windows down, spent entire afternoons in bed with sunlight spilling through the curtains, and made each other laugh until our stomachs hurt. But eventually, the calendar caught up to us. August was nearly over. The first chill of autumn was in the air. One evening, as we sat on the pier watching the sun go down, Claire turned to me. I have to go back next week, she said softly. I know, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about coming with me? Yes, I said without hesitation. She looked at me like she was trying to memorize my face. Then let's not waste another second. The next days were a blur of packing, planning, and late nights that ended with us falling asleep in each other's arms. But the night before we were supposed to leave, Claire grew quiet. What's wrong? I asked as we lay in bed. She hesitated, then said, I'm scared. Of what? Of going back to my old life. Of him showing up again. Of us not working once we're there. I took her hand. Then we make a new life. Our life. And if he shows up, we deal with it together. Her eyes shone with tears. You make it sound so easy. I smiled. Because it is. When it's real, it's simple. The next morning, we loaded the last of her things into my car. As we stood outside her apartment one last time, Claire looked at the building, then at me. This is where it started, she said with a bittersweet smile. And this, I said, taking her face in my hands, is just the beginning. The drive to the city was long but strangely peaceful. Claire played music the whole way, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand. When we finally arrived, she took me to her favorite coffee shop, introduced me to the owner like I was already part of her world, and showed me the little apartment she had found for us. It was small, barely big enough for 2 people, but when she turned to me and said, "Welcome home," I believed her. For a while, everything was perfect. But life in the city was different, louder, faster, less forgiving. Claire's ex stayed away, but the stress of work, bills, and adjusting to a new place started to creep in. There were nights we argued, slammed doors, slept on opposite sides of the bed. But every time, no matter how bad the fight, We always found our way back to each other. One night, after one of those fights, Claire climbed into my lap and buried her face in my neck. "You still think this was worth it?" she asked. I kissed the top of her head. "Every second." She smiled through her tears. "Me too." Months passed. The seasons changed. And then one morning, as we were sitting on the couch drinking coffee, Claire looked at me with a nervous little smile. "I have news," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "Good news, I hope." "The best," she said. "I got the job I wanted." And, she hesitated, then handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photo, grainy, black and white. I froze, staring at it. "Is this?" Claire nodded, tears in her eyes. "We're having a baby." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like the universe had just handed me everything I'd ever wanted. I pulled her into my arms. "Guess summer really did change everything," I whispered. Months later, we went back to the lake. The pier was still there, weathered and old, just like it had been the day we met. Claire stood at the edge, her hand resting on her small baby bump, smiling at the water. "This is where you first looked at me like that," she said, teasing. "This is where you first smiled at me like that," I replied. She laughed, then turned serious. "We made it?" "Yeah," I said, wrapping my arms around her from behind. "We really did." The sun set slowly, painting the sky in gold and pink. And for a moment, it felt like time had stopped, just like that first day. Only now, I knew something for sure: this wasn't just a summer story anymore. This was the start of forever.